Welcome back. This is the leg band video for our mix and match series. So you should have a panty with a gusset together. And then for this video, you'll need 2 leg bands, and this is the pattern piece provided. So we're just going to fold our undie right sides together, matching up the side seams. And you're going to stitch that. I use my serger, you can use your sewing machine, but then I also like to fold it toward the back of the undie and top stitch it down. Just so I know that that seam isn't going to be flapping in the side in there, and that when I go to attach the waistband and the leg bands, it's pushed the correct way. So do that on both sides and top stitch those down. Now, while you're there, you're going to take your leg bands and fold them right sides together, matching the 2 short ends. Now this one, I don't want you to serge. You certainly can if you choose to, but you're going to create extra bulk. So for this one, I want you to machine stitch with your stretch stitch, just the 2 short ends closed on both of your leg bands. Alright, so we have our side panels stitched together, and I just have those seams top stitched toward the back of my undie, just so it's a nice flat seam and everything's where I want it to go. Right, and then I have my leg bands stitched the short end together, and they are currently wrong sides together. Now we're going to need some color-coded pins here. I have pink, blue, green, and orange. I just want to open this seam, and this is why we didn't stitch it on our serger. Let's see if I can get a little closer for you. It's not focusing. Just going to open that seam, and then I'm going to fold it together, wrong sides together. Now this is going to be what I'm going to call my back, and I'm going to mark that with a blue pin. So I'm just going to fold that together, wrong sides together, all across the length. I'm going to fold it at that seam, and then where it folds on the other end, I'm going to mark that with a pink pin, and I'm going to call that my front. I'm going to match those pins. Make sure I'm still folded together. And then where it folds out to the side, I'm going to mark with a green pin. I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. So I'm going to make sure my front and back pins are matched. And mark that side with a green pin. All right, so now your band is quartered, and you know where your front and your back and your 2 sides are. You're going to do that same thing with the other band. And once you get that done, then we need to quarter our leg. So I want this seam, this back of my band, to be at my side seam. So I'm just going to put a blue pin in this seam that's already here. And then I need to pull this apart. And by holding the seam, I'm just going to find where this naturally folds, and I'm not trying to match these curves because they're different curves. One's convex and one's concave. So I'm just going to fold this, and then where this fabric flows naturally and makes a fold in my gusset, that's where I'm going to mark my front with my pink pin. And then I'm just going to pull it out the other way. I'm going to match the pink and the blue pin. And then I'm just going to let that leg naturally fold out to both ends. And I'm going to mark both of those side folds now with a green pin each. All right, so now my leg is quartered. And I do have my undies inside out. I like to put my band inside of my undie rather than stretch the band around the outside of the undie. So I'm just going to open that leg. I'm going to drop my band inside. And you're going to match your raw edges. So the two raw edges of the band are going to match the raw edge of the undie, and you're going to match your pins. So wherever you have a blue pin, you're going to remove one and blue pin it in place. Make sure you're not twisted. Match your pink pin, remove one, and pin your front in place. You're going to do the same thing to your two sides. And that's why I use green pins on both sides rather than one green and one orange. That way I don't have to try and worry about, well, what side goes where. I just know that my front and my backs match, and then I have a side and a side. All right, so now our band is attached to our leg, and then you'll see we have kind of a little bit of a gap here. The idea is to stretch this band to fill the gap as you're sewing, but to kind of help us along so we don't have so much stretching in the machine, if you just hold those two pins and give it just enough tug that the edges meet, you can just kind of grasp it in the center there. It doesn't have to be exact. And then I'm just going to use my orange pins to hold that there. That gives you less of a space to pull while you're in your machine. And I'm going to do that for each section. So I just grab my two pins and just give the band enough of a tug until it meets. Just picking somewhere in the center where it meets, and mostly where I can reach with my fingers from the pin, because I'm still holding the pin back here, holding it tight, and then grabbing a point with my fingers. So again, I stretch my pins apart, grab a piece in the center, and then once I let go, I'm at that point, so I can come back and I can adjust where these met. And then I have one more section. All right, I just want to point out from your side seam here where your blue pin is, as you're going down toward your front on the back of your panty, you'll see it kind of makes a, like where your booty curves out. Make sure when you're stitching that together that you follow that curve and you don't trim any of that fabric off, thinking that you need to match it to the band. You need to follow that curve so that your booty has that nice finished curve when you're finished. So now that that is all in place, you're going to go to your machine. I always start at my blue pin and I sew with my band facing up so I can see it. So I'll sink my needles in at this blue pin, whether it's serger or sewing machine. And then I'll grab this orange pin and pull the band taut enough that those are lined up, and I'll serger stitch along, remove this pin, sink my needles, do my next section, and I go along that way. I don't trim anything off here. I do a 1/4 inch with my serger and trim nothing off these sides. So go ahead and attach both of your legs. All right, we've got both of our leg bands attached. And we're just going to give a little check and make sure there's no holes or gaps anywhere. And a little tip for serger users: when you're in the round and you have to come off and you have those loops sort of sticking off there, cut yourself a little bit of a tail. Just reach in here, right here where this tail separates, and grab yourself one of those loops on the top and separate that loop from the tail so you have this single strand. Now just tug that single strand and see how those loops are closing up. So now they're not sticking off of the top. If you need to tie a knot or tuck your tail in, weave in your ends, however you normally do it, go ahead. I'm top stitching over this, so I'm just going to clip them right there, and I'll catch them with my top stitch. And that is our next step. So we're going to turn right sides out. And then there's your band, right sides together with your stitching. You just flip that band over. When you flip that band over, it's going to pop that seam up onto your body. So you don't want to fold that seam onto the band and try and top stitch through there. It's too thick. You want that seam to fold toward the body and be flat. And then you want to top stitch on your body all the way around your leg opening. If you're using the absorbent gusset, you're going to be kind of thick right there. It'll still be fine because we cut it out of that. We cut it shorter. And just all the way around, back to your side seam, and do that on both your legs. All right, we have our leg bands top stitched. And then this is where I was talking about how that back sort of comes out. Since we followed that curve, it looks like we have extra fabric there, but that's going to pull and that's going to tuck right up under your butt cheek. So that little flap of fabric right there is going to help cup your bottom and keep you covered. There's what it looks like on the outside. Again, I just used my zigzag. And then on the inside, you can see what I was talking about in some of my gusset videos, how that zigzag just perfectly is the same width as my serging stitches. So it just holds it down nice and tight and firmly. And then there's our seam, how since we opened it, it's nice and flat and smooth. If you had serged that and tried to fold it over, it would have been really bulky to sew over and sew together right there, because you have a serge seam next to a serge seam. You're serging over that seam, then you're flipping it over, and then you're trying to stitch on like 4 layers of serge seams here. So that's why we stitch those bands together and don't serge them. All right, so those are the leg bands. Pick your waistband and I'll meet you over there.